Cool. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am delighted to be the person that's going to host today. This is the first one I'll be hosting, so please bear with me. Still very, very excited. We've got some great speakers with us today on the topic of communication within schools and how to effectively build relationships. Just a quick introduction on myself. I am a qualified teacher. I qualified in South Africa in 2004 and then made my way across the seas to the UK to come and do some teaching here. Was only supposed to come for 1 year. I've been here now for 13 years. So it's been quite some time. And of those time, I've spent 10 years as a teacher in schools. And my experience is mostly in London schools in Southwark and Westminster. And I worked across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And as part of that role, obviously relationships and building relationships and effectively communicating was really, really important. And I'm happy to share some of my knowledge today with Sharon and Amifa as well. And since then, I have been working with Zen Educate. And I mostly work face-to-face with schools where I try to understand better on the sort of people that they employ, finding the right fits for them, and then managing those relationships with them as well. Together with me today, I also have Sharon and Amifa, as I just mentioned, and I'll quickly do a quick introduction of both of them. Sharon is an SEN TA with over 17 years of experience supporting children from earliest foundation stage up to Key Stage 2 as a workshop leader. She also has worked for a year as a teaching assistant supporting children reception and has experience supporting special education needs children, including English as an additional language and autism. Sharon, I don't know if you maybe want to add anything else to that short profile of what we have.
No, I think that's you done it quite well. That is exactly what I am.
Brilliant. Well, welcome, Sharon. And then we have Amifa. Amifa has been working in schools through Zen for nearly 3 years, mainly supporting children with SEN. She holds a degree in social and political science from Cambridge University. And after graduating, Amifa worked in the corporate sector. After having her 2 children, she returned to her passion, the education sector. She now works as a TA through Zen and has her own growing child minding business through which she employs 2 assistants. Amifa, I don't know if you would like to add anything.
No, that's all good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, just some information before we start. So what we will do is after each topic, and there's going to be 6 areas we're going to focus on in terms of communication. So if you do want to send some questions or you want to add some value to these conversations, please do so in the chat box. My colleague Ross is also on this, and he would look at that questions and he will kind of group them to see whether we can cover most of them by the end of this workshop, where we will take some questions. Also, the slides will be sent over to everybody by the end of this workshop, and this is also recorded, and that recording will be on our YouTube channel in due course. And then the final thing that I just wanted to add again, please do, actually I said it already, but please do add questions as much as you possibly can for us to really get everybody's involvement. And I just want to add that this is a workshop, right? And for those of you who are working in schools, I think the best way I have learned was through learning from others. And try to incorporate that with my style. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is have formulate some experiences together to get the best practice for our children in our schools, and making sure that they get the best learning experience. Brilliant. Okay, we are going to start. And the first bit that we're going to look at is just understanding the reason why we decided to focus on communication. And the difficulties that come with communication, understanding communication models. So there are different sort of communication models, but the one that we're going to look at is the linear communication model. In the book, Introducing Communication Theories, Analysis and Applications, the author Authors West Turner explore how 3 different models of communication, linear, interactional, and transactional models, can shed light on how we communicate with one another. And really what I'd like us to explore here, and again, I'm going to just highlight this, I'm no expert on communication models, but if you are interested in some readings on this deck, you will find, when we send it over, you will find that you can click on that, and that really explains to you the different sort of models. But the one thing that I'd like us to focus on while we have these conversations today is very much thinking about the speaker and the receiver, and then that noise that's in between, and how we can eliminate or minimize that noise to make sure that in a school, when we're working with other professionals, we deliver effective communication, and we really achieve and land the messages that we're trying to land. Cool. If we can go to the next slide. So 2 examples of this really, before we go into more experiences of our own, is the 2 that I've got on a display here is pre-arranging essential communication with staff before school starts or during break or lunch. And then key messages they are properly received. And from my experience here, I know that every school has a different structure on how communication works, but I certainly, in my last experience where I worked as a phase lead, I had an NQT that I was managing, but I also had 4 TAs on the floor. And one of the early feedbacks that I had was that sort of everybody making sure that they are getting exactly the same messaging and the right time for us to share that messaging. And then together with my deputy head and my head teacher, we agreed that we will have time during an assembly where we will be released from that to sit and really discuss in detail all the top line messages that's coming from the senior management for us to deliver within our phase, but also some of the nitty-gritty communications in our classrooms where we don't really always get time to talk about. And I have to say, just because I created that environment and gave the opportunity for people to really share what they're thinking, the whole experience, our today experience for the staff was completely changed. And obviously, because of that, the children had a much better experience as well. And that's just a small change that you can make in terms of improving communication. And then another one is obviously, most importantly, is making sure that our children's well-being and safeguarding is looked after. You know, if you want to speak to a designated safeguarding lean, obviously you want to do that as soon as possible, but really understand, you know, what channels there is and how that channels work when you're in a school. And if you're in an awkward position where you're with a class and you've noticed something, you know, how do you manage the noise of emotional reactions that we have in school, to really minimize that noise and make sure that when we communicate with the staff and the designated safeguarding leads, that we land those messages effectively. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of pre-thinking and sort of homework that we can do in ourselves to make sure that we as professionals land messages effectively in whatever capacity. Sharon and Amifa, I don't know if you guys wanted to add something to that. You don't have to. I'll open up the floor every now and again for everybody to kind of share something if they wanted to. No? Oh, did you, Sharon?
I just wanted to say one of the best, that I support what you've just said. One of the best days I've had in a school is when there was a meeting had by the deputy head, called a staff meeting beforehand, and as I was new and was just there for that day, introduced me to absolutely everyone, told them what my role was, who I was with, where I was going to be. She had given out the notices beforehand, but then included me in that. Everyone said hello, and throughout the day I was communicated with, asked about support, my opinion on who I was working with. I was working with 3 children that particular day, but it was, I felt like I'd been there for years because everybody knew who I was, and my opinion was relevant and relative to what they were doing. And senior leadership, again, came and found me in my break, found me in my lunch hour to continue that communication, which the children, and it goes on, I think we were speaking about that later, to support the family of those children as well. So
Absolutely.
yes.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon. Ross, shall we move on to the next slide?
I'm happy to add as well.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, definitely.
So we just had a question about what do we mean by noise, and noise, from my understanding of those theories, is effectively just what is interrupting the communication, in terms of what's being said and what is being heard. So noise is just the extra thing. So emotional noise would literally be if a child is so upset about something that you can't even maybe get the point across about why it's not maybe that big a deal. Or in an adult example, noise might be that somebody is so frightened or feeling so nervous in a situation that they're literally, when you're in a situation you feel nervous and you can't even hear what's being said to you, that's emotional noise. So I hope that answers that question.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Amifa. Cool. Shall we move on to the next slide? So our first focus we're going to have today in terms of communication is the communication between teaching assistants and teachers. I've mentioned a little bit around it, but let me just explain a little bit around the resourceful partnership. And basically what I'm referring to is how teachers and TAs can communicate with each other effectively in order to support children's safeguarding and learning. And whenever we go to schools, I think whatever decision that we are making in schools, that decision should be to improve the learning experience of those children and making sure that they are safe and we're looking after their well-being. I'm going to ask Sharon to share some of her knowledge and experiences on this, and then we'll open up maybe to me and Amifa to maybe add something to that as well.
So I work as a TA, and I often am in a different school every other day, or I'm in there for a couple of days. But what I have experienced is often the school have not given me full information on what I'll be doing that day until I get there. And so often I will have a frantic 5 minutes meeting with the teacher beforehand, telling me, and because I often work one-to-one with children, the history of that child, and it's a lot to absorb, it's a lot for them to get out, it's a lot happening whilst classroom is being set up. So a resourceful partnership would be if I could have all the information beforehand, and Zen's very good at giving me as much as they can, but often when I get there I find it's the school that hasn't revealed enough information. So if it's a general that I'm working, then I just need to know about the timetable for the day, and if there are any children who may need support but not necessarily have a one-to-one. And when it comes to one-to-one, what the needs are of that child, whether it be medical, whether it be behavioural, whether it be autistic, I've had all three, and some extreme, some wanting me to just support but also try and get them to work independently as well. And specific work, sometimes I've had to teach lessons, full-on lessons, and it's just given to me beforehand. If it was possible to have the background information before we go in, then we could discuss more, or I could have the knowledge of where they are at that particular day or that particular week, rather than getting their entire history from when they were 4 years old and whether they were their whole family history. So that's something that I need to try and ascertain the information from the school, whether it be a form they fill in, ticking boxes saying this is the child's need, because schools of course have our time restraints, but if it was something that even the office could have on hand and just keep part of their record, so that when they're working with an agency, because I have had extreme cases of behaviour that if it was someone less experienced, they might not be able to handle that. So that breakdown of communication has happened before we've even gotten into the school, and with one particular boy, people were tapping me on the back, wishing me luck because he was so extreme in behaviour. And then the basic questions that I have at the beginning of the day for the teacher is obviously arriving early, but that again, sometimes the person is not on hand to speak to you, or at one point I was there early, teacher didn't arrive until as the children were coming in, so was telling me the information as the children were coming in. This particular boy was medical needs, and I was looking for him thinking he's going to come in any minute, and I'm not even sure, I haven't got all the details about what his needs are, and with the medical one it's quite important as well. And I ask the standard questions: what's the timetable, are there any breaks? Not because I need to have a break, but because if there's a handover time, it's important I also explain that to the child as well. Yes, it's that kind, that's my experience, is that the breakdown. And then throughout the day, if there could be some sort of feedback form, again, I've had teachers run out on me because they need to get to meetings at the end of the day, and I've got either loads to, I've had one when I've had to teach an entire lesson after school, no possibility to give feedback. And this all links to what we're discussing later about how we can support families and community. And I haven't even been able to give back what those children did. I always start with positives as well, and then see where we can do our next steps. But that's not always been possible.
Great, thank you so much. Sharon, can you think of an example? Sorry, I'm just put you on the spot. If you don't, it's fine. Of because I think this is actually an issue that a lot of teaching assistants, in whatever capacity they are, especially in the supply world, right, as a cover, when you walk into an environment and you're really trying your best to make sure that child, if it's an SENTA role, is getting the best possible experience. Have you ever been in a situation where you walked into school, like you mentioned earlier, where nothing has been given to you and you really had to make it up as you went? Do you have any specific tips, or maybe share that specific experience on how you managed yourself? I know you said there's a few things that you think that should be in place, and I'll address that in a little bit as well. But your experience of that, what would you say to people they can do to make it easier should they be in that position?
I have been in an experience, yes, where they've just said, this is the child, and it was an autistic child, and the child was non-speaking, which is again something that if they had, if I'd had the information beforehand, would have been great, because I use Makaton, and so can communicate with children. So even if you're giving the information over on what the medical thing, there is also specifics that you can do to help. It's a question of like almost that safeguarding of the child. The child becomes the one that I have then just focused on them. And as an experienced TA and work with children, I was just able to work with her. She was quite passive, so there wasn't any behavioural issues, and I was fortunate on that front. I've had children where again, the strategies that they use, the strategies is what you want to share. What strategies do you use to help these children? She was out of the class for the entire day in the playground, and that was, I went along with her and supported her. Tried to get information about whether or not she could access it at school at all, but even the teacher in there was a cover. So you are kind of sometimes working, hitting the ground running. And my tip is to then, okay, if there's no adult support, adult input around, we have to then focus on what that child is and what that child needs are.
Yes. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Before we go on to you, Amifa, I just want to add something to that as well. And just in line with communication. And I think it's really important that if you go into a school and you do realize that you've been put into a position like that, and first of all, I think schools should have clear policies on how that informations are passed on over to supplies for that child to have the best possible experience on the day. But I would say that if you arrive at a school, part of your role is communication, and if you don't have the sufficient information to make sure that child is getting the best experience, it's okay to ask. And you mentioned, Sharon, you mentioned strategies, right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel, because if you're going to go into an environment where you're going to try to do something with some children will be receptive to new things, but some children will just not, because they're used to their routines.
Oh,
so
no, sorry, I did mean the strategies that are in place that they
absolutely,
not
I agree.
And coming up with anything. And
I agree with you on that. But I do think sometimes it's difficult when you walk into a strange environment, if you don't know what the strategies are, right? So the point I'm trying to make, Sharon, is like, ask. It's okay to ask your teacher or the TA or anybody that's on the floor. Ask them what the strategies are, and then just use that in practice, because I think it helps. So that's a really good point, Sharon. Thank you. Brilliant. Shall we move on to the next slide? Amifa, you wanted to share some of your experiences as well.
Yeah, so the main thing that I want to talk about in terms of if we can them for a second, are the EHCP. So that's the Education, Health and Care Plans. I'm sure many of you would have heard of them, but if you haven't, then it's basically a document that puts in quite a lot of detail what the child's specific SEN needs are, what has worked, you know, in the past, what other teachers and TAs have seen to be, you know, helpful for the child. It also commonly includes triggers, so things that basically make the child, you know, behave in a way that's challenging. And yeah, we can. I know we haven't got too much time, so I won't go into that too much. But yeah, that's basically what you need. The difficult thing about it is that sometimes they can be out of date. I'm sure many people here would have experienced that. So as the speakers before me have said, you know, it's really important to try and get some detail from the teacher, if possible, beforehand. You know, I do understand as well that there'll be some teachers here who have the experience of, you know, you've had the school has had the call on the morning to say that the TA for that particular child or the class, you know, isn't coming in. So that's sometimes why they don't have the information, you know, necessarily to hand. But at the very least, it's children, they should already have an EHCP, especially if they've got a one-to-one. One particular school that I worked in had a passport, and this passport was basically a maximum 2-page document that effectively summarized the EHCP and was handed to people who are coming in, you know, just for a day or, you know, a few weeks or whatever, and might not necessarily have had time to read the whole EHCP. It was something that, you know, had the child literally hit the child's photo, their date of birth, and just the key points of how to look after this particular child. So things like, you know, using now and next calls and particular strategies that were helpful for that child. So, you know, if there are any teachers here who are wondering, oh, but, you know, an EHCP might be too long to give to somebody, you know, Sharon said, they've come in, they've got 5 minutes to get the update, you know, do please consider having a shortened version of the EHCP for the TA that's coming in, or the supply person that's coming in for that child. You'll see on the slide, I've got a couple of photos there. If you look at the last two on the right, so all of these are basically from my childcare setting. As was said before, I'm a childminder, and I have got permission, by the way, to have these photos up, just in case anybody was wondering. But actually, one day, just last week, the children decided to go to the trunk modelling area and make a telephone. You know, when you have a piece. So he's holding a yogurt. They're both, the two children, holding yogurt boxes, and between the two, we've got a piece of string. And Nardus, when you were mentioning noise,
yes,
you know, it's kind of linked to this, because that piece of string, what we all worked out when we made this telephone last week was that if the piece of string isn't exactly straight, you can't hear what the person is saying. So, you know, if the teacher is saying, it's passing on information to a TA that's only going to be there for one day, try as much as possible to be as straight as you can. Try to be as direct about it as you can. You know, it's really hard because in a way, human to human, you're thinking, you know, I don't want to come across as rude, or I don't want to overburden them with too much information. But you know, so therefore, the more direct you can say it, just say it, and don't worry about, oh, you know, I'm sorry if this sounds a bit, you know, like the child is difficult. Just say what it is. So, for example, so just to give an example, I was looking after a child that, you know, is classed as this difficult term, global delay. He was 7 years old, but didn't speak at all. Literally hardly interacted very much with the other children in the class, ran out of the class all the time. And no one told me quite direct. They just sort of said, oh, you know, he can be a bit tricky sometimes. But what tricky meant was that sometimes he would literally bite you. And you, as daunting as it can be to tell somebody who might only be there for a week, I know you don't want to scare them off, but it's really important to say, please be careful, because he can get physically violent and can actually bite you. So the more you say as quickly as you can, as directly as you can, the better it is for the person receiving the information. Keep the information straight. Yeah, and then the other thing that I would say about effective communication between teachers and TAs is that even if you're only there for a day, if you notice there's a massive gap, i.e. the fact that there is not a passport or you haven't been given the EHCP, you know, I would say don't be afraid to be the person that fills the gap. I'm not encouraging everybody to spend their whole lunchtime you know, writing out something in detail about, you know, the child. But what I'm saying is, if there is a down moment, you know, maybe put pen to paper and just jot a few notes down about the child that could be given to the next person who's going to be in your place tomorrow. And that's how, to be honest with you, I approach being a TA who might just be standing in, you know, for a very short amount of time. I try to leave the information that I would have liked to receive if I don't receive it. And sometimes, like, if you have what we call a runner, I don't know if that's definitely not a professional term, you know, if you have a child who's running in and out of the class and actually you don't have very much time to sit down and, you know, talk to the teacher or report back what's happened, you know, feel free to, you know, write it on a post-it note or something. Of course, it's, you know, not your class, you might not even know where they are, but if you can get a scrap piece of paper and just write a little note for the teacher, because they might already be quite fussed about the fact that they don't have their general TA. You know, you're the new person who's come in and they're like, oh gosh, I don't even know how long you're going to be here for. There's almost no point me giving you the whole blurb because you don't have time to absorb it. You're not going to be here tomorrow. You can write something down and something that they can pass on to a parent, or something that can be passed on to you know, the Senko or the Senko or designated lead.
Yes.
And you know, the things on the post-it notes can be positive as well as negative. And I think it's important to do both, because you know, a lot of the I don't want to focus too much on SEN, but a lot of the SEN children do get a bad rep sometimes, or you know, Sharon gave her example about how somebody patted her on the back. You know, I've walked into a school and the receptionist said to me, you know, have you got a taser with you? And that was the first thing that the receptionist told me. That was the first impression I had about this child that I had never met. So, you know, compare have you got a taser with you to writing a quick note and saying, you know, John Jones was really friendly to another child who tripped up today. He said, you know, can I help you? And just put that on the you know, teacher's desk, so that there's a positive about this child.
Yes. Amifa, thank you. That was great. I love the passport idea. Now going back to some of my experiences, I wish we had that in our school. And just saying like that also, I mean, I don't know what everybody's circumstances are and what capacity we're working at in a school, but make these suggestions to the SLT, and, you know, share with them that, you know, you've been part of workshops where people have spoken positively about it, because I do really think it will make a massive difference if you walk into a school and you get a quick, short brief of that child, and you know what to expect and you know what strategies to practice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Also, Heather, also thank you for sharing some of your information. Yeah, I agree with that. You know, you don't need to know all the details if you're there only for a short period of time. And you also highlighted that those routines, understanding those routines quite early as you arrive is incredibly important. And again, I just want to highlight, make sure to ask those questions when we arrive. It's okay to ask those questions. That's why we're there for. And Anwar, you also shared and said that you agree with Amifa. Thank you for that. Brilliant. Amifa, I didn't know if you maybe want to just share something about we've got like 1 minute, sharing something around your childminder business. I didn't know if you want to add some information to that on what you do.
Well, you might be thinking, how do I combine it with being a TA? So before being a TA, I was considering being a teacher. So the reason why I went into TA work was because I thought, right, if I'm really gonna, go into this for sure, I should at least have some experience of it. So I had two things I was thinking of: teacher or becoming an educational psychologist. And then lockdown happened, or the pandemic happened basically, and bubbles were closing and things like that. So in the end, because I love working with children and schools were closed and it was, I had my own little ones, I just decided to become a childminder. So I did the training during a lot of the summer last year and during some of the lockdown. I work for an agency called Tiny. It's an agency that started by the same company that started Teach First, and it's great being able to transition into my own business while being a teaching assistant through Zen, because I know that I can block out days. So for example, I don't work Monday, then it means that I'm available to go into schools that Zen can send me into on Mondays, and it means I keep one foot in the door. I've got a lot of the strategies that I can steal from teachers, because obviously I don't have teacher training, but I can steal some of the strategies, the things that I see, and put it into my childminder business. So brilliant. I mean, my I don't know if anyone's got children. I work in the Bellingham area, Catford Bellingham area. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Nardus.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for that, Amifa. Ross, if we move on to the next slide, the next bit is around effective communication and support and safeguarding. I'm going to keep this one pretty brief. We've run over a bit of time, so this is just going to be me just sharing 2 of my tips that I think has helped me in the past as a teacher. If we go to the next slide, Ross. So I would say for me, like when it comes to safeguarding, for me, there's a don't and there's a do, right? And as a young teacher, when I started, I did come across a concern, and I'm not going to go in details about what the concern were, but there was definitely emotional response inside of me because I had concerns about the family as well. And when you're in a position like that, where you've noticed something, whether it's the child has said something, or maybe you have seen that there were some signals on the body of the child where there's a mark or whatever it is, it's easy for us to get emotional about it. And we should try, and again, just going back to the noise in communication and making sure that we don't ask questions that are leading in terms of what we're thinking might have happened, and really taking and write down everything that the child is saying to you as it is, because that will become a formal document, right? And in the past, when I was in the classroom, we had something called team around the child. I don't know if schools still use that term, team around the child. I don't know if there's anybody on that's familiar with that concept. Anyways, but what it basically is brilliant. Thank you, Heather. It is different parties within the education and the care system all share information together to get a holistic picture of that child. And that's the bit where you make the difference in what you write down, making sure you write down exactly what the child have said in their own words, rather than what you were thinking. And obviously then there's that discussion that can happen between you and the safeguarding designated lead, if there are any opinions that you had in terms of your experiences that you've had with that child and family. We've got 1 minute. Amifa and Sharon, I don't know if you maybe wanted to add something to that.
Not really, to be honest, not on my side.
No, I think every school has their own safeguarding. I've done quite a few safeguarding courses within the school, and when it comes to if someone has said anything, one of the tips I've always done is immediately ask for another adult to be there, so that they say, so what did you say? There's a second person there to support what you're saying and what you've written, and also to support you if you do become emotional in hearing what you've just heard. So
yes.
I worked with a colleague when I was in the TA, and quite about 3 or 4 incidents throughout the year, and both of us would look for each other. Could you come here and just listen to this while I write it down, so that you've got a backup there. Always good to have adult support in that respect.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Cool. If we go to the next slide. The next one is going to be a bit of a share between Sharon and Amifa, and we're going to focus this time on communication with families, and then specifically families with children with special education needs or families with challenging behavior. And before you guys start, just from my experience, obviously as a class teacher, I had my relationship with families who had children with special education needs or specific challenging behaviors. And it makes a massive difference when you open up that communication with the families, so that they know what's happening in school, but also we know what's happening at home. And sometimes it's polar opposites, which is very interesting experiences for the family and for the educator. But one of the great things that supported me a lot in my career was TAs that showed that they care, and they create a very special bond with that family. And because of that bond, that child had the best possible experience that we can provide them with the resources that we had. And I couldn't achieve it if I didn't have that person next to me the whole time. So, but I'll leave the floor to you, Sharon and Amifa, to do your stuff.
Sharon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, with children who have educational needs, behavioural needs, often there is a home contact book that just lets the family know how their day has been. I always start that with a positive on what they've done that day. As you, Amifa, said earlier, sometimes they could just be bombarded with just negatives, but there is always something, in my opinion, positive that those children have done that day, and letting the family know that you could say they did this, but and then fill in if there's anything that needs to be worked on, but there is usually something they have done positive that day. That linked into the passports that Amifa was talking about. I've come across those quite a bit. They, unlike the EHCP, are always updated and are given to the family as well as the TAs working as well. They're updated every term. So those are a great source of communication as well. Well, I'd go back to if we could have some sort of feedback if you're only there for a day or two, to feedback to Senko, to the teacher, if you're not able to have that last conversation with them. Active listening, we all know what that is, when we just really are listening to what that family are saying rather than just us telling them. And inviting them in. I have been invited in, this was one of the best experiences I had, I speak as a parent, when I was invited into a lesson to see how my children worked and how they didn't work on, and they had to just do a lesson. It was a really a fun experience to see how all children work together. It wasn't anything that we had to sort of get involved, but it was more about them working together as a team. And to invite them in for that chat rather than that parents' evening lecture that they usually get. Something to just, that's that active listening, that could be a part of it. I think that's what's I found when I was working for a long term in school, working because parents are also going through their own issues or their work or something like that, just to hear that as well, because we can then say, oh, you must read with your child every day and you must do this with your child, and we really don't often know what their circumstances are at the in the home on that particular. And there's also, it can be even broader with the extended family as well. I had one child where one family member was extremely sick and that person took priority for that particular term. It was really important to know that, to know what that child was also dealing with at home as well. And then you become a bit more aware of their need as well and can take care of them in a more holistic way at school. It's not just about getting their numbers up and getting their reading up. It's about it's the whole thing that can't work if they're not feeling safe and protected and can tell you those things. They often will tell you, even often they, you know, my own children went through something and they went to their TA and said, I've got something to tell you. The TA already knew because it was a death in the family, but they were there completely. She then told me, oh, by the way, they spoke about it today with me. And that bereavement counsel that she gave them was just incredible for me as a parent as well. It's like, thank you. I understand the importance of TAs, you see, so I was able to. But it can be that broad as well. And then those things need to be taken care of or need to be addressed or just be aware of in order for the learning to take place, the safeguarding to take place. It was a short conversation and he got on with his work, but at the same time, he was able to tell her what had happened at home. Yes.
Cool.
I think that's
Yeah, valuable. Thank you so much. Amifa, I don't know if you wanted to add something. I know that you're I think you're on the next slide again. Do you want to add something to that, or shall we just jump to the next one?
Yeah, no, this it can stay up as it is. So
Okay.
I'm gonna come in a little bit sideways here.
Yeah.
Because I've had an experience in one school where the head teacher didn't want us TAs talking directly with the family, even though we were one-to-one TA. And to be honest, to this day, I still wonder what actually happened. Why is that? But I got the impression that there might have been an incident where a parent was maybe talking to a TA quite aggressively or something, and therefore the head teacher was trying to protect TAs. So I think that, yeah, I'll just come in a little bit sideways now and just suggest that people check with the teacher that whether there's any kind of policy around TAs talking directly with families, even while one-to-one. And in some ways it makes sense because the teacher will always have the overarching, the teacher will always have information, the full information about what is going on with that child, you know, in relation, more so in relation to their academics, of course. And then where a lot of the one-to-one TAs come in is that we can fill in kind of the day-to-day nitty-gritty, how they're doing with certain relationships. But don't be you know, I give teachers a lot of credit, even though they might have 30 children in the class, you know, they do notice the little things as well about you know, the children with SEN needs, and you know, whether they are, you know, suddenly forming a better relationship with a certain child compared to another. But yeah, so I think my main thing right now is if there is something that you want to communicate with the parent directly, first of all, say it to the teacher, and then ask them, you know, is it okay if I say this directly to the parent? Because for whatever reason, they might have a reason why they want to have that conversation. You know, they might want to insert that with something else, or they might want to add it with something else that happened before you arrived, or something in relation to their target.
I'm really, really glad you said that. And just from experience with my face-to-face relationship with schools, you know, we had situations where we had teaching assistants on the first day spoke to the families, and something was said, whatever it was, that upset that family, because the family didn't feel that that person necessarily was the person to deliver that message. And I think that is so important to sense check that. If it's something that's negative, sense check that 100% with the class teacher, and rather let the class teacher give that to the parent where the relationship already exists. But I think positive things are always great, right? Whoever gives positive information about your child, it's nice to hear. So I would say, if you are working with a child of SEN and you see them do something great, share that. They'd love that. But always sense check with the class teacher or whoever that adult is that's responsible for that class. Thank you. Ross, if we go to the next slide, Amifa, do you want to talk about these?
So this slide is it's two examples of me creating something that helped me sort of digest what I was going through with the children that I was looking after. And you know, as Nardus said, obviously don't try and recreate the wheel, but in a school, you know, check what systems exist, see if you can use the systems that already exist. But there are times where there is nothing there, or you need something that's a little bit more detailed, or whatever's there, it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all thing, and it needs to be tailored for that, you know, particular child, because as we know, every child is unique. So the first example is something that I created for a child that had ADHD and ODD. ODD means operation. Oh gosh, I've got it in my head now. Oppositional defiance disorder, and it's basically where it's just lots of challenging behaviour, basically. So the things that are running down the left-hand side are, so the first one says maths, then literature, extra guided reading, relationships, playtime, choosing, stars or high fives, positive behaviour, leaving the room, timeouts, SELT intervention. SELT stands for Senior Leadership Team, or other. So this is my daily progress sheet that I created for one child that I was looking after for about a whole academic year. And the reason why I did a daily progress sheet was because, you know, I'll be frank with you, it was emotionally draining dealing with him. And I needed something to free my mind, because I was realizing that I would go home and all this different scenarios would play out in my mind, and I'd be thinking, could I have handled that better? Or you know, why did he do that to that particular child? And you know, it was all kind of playing in my mind in at the same time as things like, did I remember to tell the teacher that he did this? Did I remember to tell the teacher that he did that? You know, the positive things. So this is basically a sheet that I created for myself, where I could literally just put a little note next to it. Maths, what did we do today? You know, we used the massive giant dice to do adding. We were throwing it in the, you know, hall, and whether that was good or not, whether it works, whether we should use it tomorrow. And on the far right hand side, it says adult initial. So just on the first table on the left, yeah, the example one, yeah, exactly. Down that side, it says adult initial. Now, obviously, I was the main person who was looking after him, but there might have been cases where I had a doctor's appointment or something and I couldn't go that day. So I would literally, I had a folder of these sheets that I could hand over to a TA that was coming to replace me for one day if I had an appointment or I had to take my child somewhere, whatever it is. And they would put their initial there to say this was the note that they took. So I'm just putting this here because when there's so much going on in the classroom and the teacher cannot necessarily obviously focus on the one-to-one child that you're dealing with, this is something that they were able to refer to in my particular instance. But other schools, you know, will have their own kind of sheet like this. And the other reason why this was helpful, not just to free my mind, but it was also about helping me identify any patterns. So if I noticed that you know, in a week, we gave five fives. That's massive, because it showed that, you know, the relationship and the bond between me and that child was getting better, and also they were feeling more positive and they were achieving lots of things. So you know, I could kind of look back and say, you know, oh gosh, compared to last week, you know, we've had five fives this week. So that's kind of, it's helping you identify a positive pattern in that sense. But then there might be negative patterns that identify, you know, it's always a particular child that they seem to get into a fight with in the playtime, or it's always around playtime that this particular action happens. And so, yeah, being able to identify patterns is important for you as well as for the teacher and for the Senko, or who is also usually the one that's going to pass on the information to the family, especially if you're, you know, the school doesn't like you passing it on directly to them. And yeah, just the last bullet point about that is the personalization really of that kind of form, because there'll be you know, a child that is not a child that leaves the room, so I wouldn't have to include that little, you know, row that says leaving the room, how many times did they leave the room this week. So yeah, that's the example on the left, and then the example on the right is one that a school gave me, and it's just got the date, what happened, what was the trigger for that child, and what was the resulting action that I took, or that, you know, attempted. And this was for a child that had quite severe autism, and it's basically an incident journal, and it was only really filled in for when there was an incident. And the reason why I was given this was because the family, you know, obviously we're talking about families, the family needed almost convincing about why this particular child was not suited to a mainstream school. So kind of touching on or relating to what I mentioned before about identifying patterns, in a situation where you are looking after a child who the school team has basically identified that mainstream school is not the right setting for them, you are going to be part of the team that is effectively establishing a case as to why they should not be in this school. Instead, they should be in a school that is specialised. You know, it's SEN specific. This school is going to cater for this particular child's needs. So in this example that I'm speaking about, this child was the last of 6 children. So you can imagine the parents have seen it all. You know, they just thought, look, every child has their own quirks. There's nothing particularly different or special or unique about our child that requires him to leave mainstream education. This is what the parents say. But at the same time, when I arrive in the school, the child is literally only there for an hour and a half. He's coming at 9 and leave at 10:30, because he was so overwhelmed by the situation. He was so ill-fitted to the system that he couldn't survive very well in the system. He would start biting. He would be running out of the class, etc. Luckily, I was there for a month. So this was in November last year. I was covering the TA who happened to, they needed to shield. The TA needed to shield. And luckily, by the time I was there for that month, by the time I was leaving, because he was moving on to the family did eventually agree that he could move on to an SEN school. He was there for the whole day. But it was because I literally was filling out a daily form, and I was, you know, I'd be like studying what happened today, and I very quickly realized that what the parent had said to the Senko in front of me was very important. She had said, he is not here for long enough. Now, you know, I was there, I heard it, but I thought, let me not, you know, I'm not sticking my oar in here because I've only just arrived. But I witnessed her point, because what would happen is when the child would come into school, he was expecting to leave. So he would be running out towards reception because he knows his mum's going to be there at 10:30 anyway. There was this massive glass door. He could see her coming even from outside. And, you know, I eventually said to the Senko, you know, I did hear that mum said that she thinks he's not here long enough. You know, he's not biting me that much. You know, I'm happy to, if you want me to try and stretch him, I'm happy to. So the Senko and I worked out a way that we could literally stretch his day. So over the course of a month, he was there, no longer leaving school from 10:30. I mean, at 10:30, he was leaving school by 3:30. I'll be honest with you, he wouldn't last that much, but we would go and play outside. We would even be playing in the rain. Whatever it was to make him stay longer is what we did. I had to listen as a TA and as a new person to what the parent was saying and have that discussion. I wasn't going to say to the mum, I think you're right, mum. You said last week he should be staying here longer, because I don't know the history. But I just suggested it to Senko. We worked out how we could potentially do it, and we worked out that. And when the Senko then told the mum, she said to him, look, we're not sure, but we will try this. So she wasn't filling the mum with false hope. But by the end of that period, one, she had agreed that he wasn't suited to that setting. And two, he was doing a full day. And that was one of the requirements, actually, for the school, for the SEN school that he was going to, that this child could stay in a setting of some sort for the whole day.
Yeah. Brilliant. I loved all of that. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. And I just going back to, Ross, you mind just going back to the previous one, the way you've been tracking for triggers and patterns. I mean, that is just incredible if you can identify it, because a lot of the times we don't track that, so we don't understand really why that child is upset. So it's a vicious circle going round and round and round and round, and that poor child is not being listened to. So I think this is a great example of trying to identify that over a period of time, and then sharing that with the people that's working around that child as well. And then Michelle, you mentioned as well the importance of a Senko in a school. I agree. I think I've worked in schools where I worked with some better Senkos than others, and it does make a difference. But just feeding into that as well, us as teaching assistants, working with children with special education needs, your voice is super important. So, I mean, this example that Amifa have shared around how you can record things, sharing that with a Senko or whoever that person is who takes full responsibility for that child's progress in school, the overarching management of it. That sort of information is very, very helpful, and you can use your initiative. To create that. So, thank you for sharing, everybody. Let's move on to the next slide, Ross. This is gonna be just really short. If we think about the whole experience of the child, and we think about communication within schools, I've just written down a couple of things. If we go to the next slide. So, you get parents in the school that's very involved. We all know who they are. And we get parents in schools that's not as involved as other parents. And I think as professionals, we have a responsibility to highlight a couple of things to them where they get the right messages. And sometimes it's language barriers. I have definitely worked with parents who didn't understand English. So sometimes their children had to translate to them what has been said. And that's quite an adult hat to carry for children, right? Because they're just delivering messages that the teacher is saying. And if we were speaking to somebody who did understand English, we could explain that in greater detail so that the parent is understanding what we're trying to achieve. And I think in circumstances like that, it's important for us to kind of take note. Parents are not always going to understand the messages that's been shared about the community. And what role do we play to see whether we can deliver those messages effectively so that they can involve their children in wider community activities. And then just some obvious ones, obviously notice boards. I think it's fine for you in a parent meeting to speak to specific parents that you know is not that involved in the community or in the school, direct them to these notice boards. You can also be involved in what's going on in the notice boards weekly. If there's a notice board in the school and it hasn't been updated for months, it looks really bad. I think it's better, I think, than if there's nothing in there, rather than something that's really outdated. And us as professionals, it's not just up to the SLT. If we see something like that and it's having a negative effect or no effect on the community, it's okay for you to go and speak to people in the school, whether it's the admin staff or whether it's your class teacher, or whether you're the class teacher, you want to speak to the SLT about it, and make sure we update those notice boards, and that is actually going to benefit the family and the children in terms of what's happening in the community as well. Obviously, newsletters, see if you can include newsletters, some specific things about what's happening in the community, whether it's a local project in libraries, whether there's local speakers anywhere speaking about a specific topic. The children in my class used to love local writing competitions. that's just something like, as adults, if we are not introducing them to that and we're not leading on that, and we're not monitoring and managing it for them, they will never have those experiences. And it's where, it's not just about, you have to hit your levels or your attainment. It's about use your learning now and go outside and practice it in the real world. And then we're preparing them for the real world. So why are we not exposing them to that, exposing those children to more of those sort of real world scenarios? So I guess for the main thing here for me in terms of communication with parents is like, it's on us as well as professionals to make sure we involve the families in what's happening in the community. And the important thing there as well is relationships, right? And that's how we deliver these messages. And sometimes through your relationships with parents and families, they might tell you what's happening in the communities as well, and then see whether you can use that information that they're providing to share with other families as well. Cool. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is how we communicate with senior leaders, right? And again, this is going to be quite short. And again, I want to speak through my experiences. If we go to the next slide, Ross. I think there's different messages that we want to land with senior management, right? It could be a quick update on something personal. It could be a very important update about a child. It could be an update about a concern that you have around a staff member, a general feedback about the school, maybe in terms of how the operation work in the school. It could be feedback about a family. But I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves questions before we go into those conversations and that communication lines to make sure that we're effective about it. And one thing that has really helped me over time on how to almost prioritize, first of all, prioritize what important messages it is I want to send to the SLT, one, and to when and where those messages should happen. Should it happen now? Can it wait? Should it happen later? Because you have to appreciate that those senior leaders have immense responsibility on them as well. And I think it's up to us as professionals as well to decide what the best time and place is to deliver certain messages. So these are some questions that I just ask myself whenever something comes up and I'm like, oh gosh, I really need to go speak to the head teacher about that, just to sense check with myself how I'm going to do that. So when is appropriate time, like whatever that might be, where is the best place to talk? Is it that I'm going to catch the head teacher in the corridor? Hey, I need to tell you something. Or is that really the best time to speak to that person? What message do I want the senior leader to receive? Really make sure you can communicate what it is that you want for that person to understand. I was definitely in situations before where, again, I got quite passionate about something and then I tried to describe it. And then when I walked out of that conversation, I was like, but did I actually land the message that I wanted to land? So rethink what you are going to say. Their time is incredibly precious, and practice these questions. Like practice these questions in your head first before you go in, because then your message will be much clearer and you will probably lose a lot of that noise, or at least minimize it. And then also, like I said earlier, it's like, how important is that question that you wanted to ask, or a communication line that you wanted to pass on. Sharon and Amifa, I don't know if you guys want to add anything on those two topics.
Yes, appropriate time. I usually leave it at the end of my day, because if it's usually that's something that's happened, or in my break if it's something short, where I always go straight to their office and have it there. And also we start with, have you got a few minutes? Because as you say, they are extremely busy. Again, I speak to a senior leadership team a lot when I'm in schools, often to give feedback. One school had a unit which I was so impressed with how these children who were in the autistic unit were completely involved in the whole of school life, and I just fed that back to them. They quoted what I said. It was like, oh, get a pen, someone write down what she said, quoted me and put it on their website. That and so just a general feedback was something that they're really appreciative of praise as well. Going back to what Amifa said, there was one case where I had to speak about a child that I just didn't think was in the right setting, and they knew everything, you know, but it was, as you say, again, building up a case and speaking to that, because I think, approached for my opinion and thought, you know, so I was called in and then had to give my opinion on that as well. Let's think, what was the other message? And that, yes, I think that's it.
Cool.
Really.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Brilliant. So we've come to the end of today's workshop. I want to just thank everybody for joining. But before we finish up, we are taking some questions. And there's one specific one that I think is so in our world now. And I think as professionals, when we go into these environments, we have to be prepared for these sort of things. And we don't always get the training for it because of limited funding. So I think this is a really interesting question. So I'm just going to read it as it is from from one of the panelists. As you know, refugees have recently come in and their children will be in schools in our communities. Do you have any tips for helping these families? Which obviously I don't have all the answers for it, but I have definitely worked with families in the past that have arrived quite early on. And there was a lot of language barriers. And I guess my tip on that would be, the first of all is I'll contact one of the SLT members who I get onboarded that family in the school and get as much information I can about the family to understand what sort of resources I can rely on that they have in their home life, and then play a lot on that resource if there is anything. And now that resource could be, maybe they have a family member who can speak English, so I would ask them if I could maybe see them at least once a week when they come and collect the children, so I can have a conversation with that person that they can carry on, or I can maybe potentially ask a staff member who can speak the language that they came with to the country and see whether they can translate, so that there is a communication line happening. But I think what is really important for us to appreciate is the circumstances that family come in with, right? And really try to, you know, we really have to think about each family as a separate unit and what sort of challenges that family is going through. And within those challenges, what are the challenges that child is going through before they come into school that morning? You know, and really appreciate it and plan effectively for those children and that family so that they do feel supported, would be my advice. Amifa and Sharon, I don't know if you guys have ever come across anything that might be helpful.
Just a quick one, really. I think, I know we were supposed to end at 11:30, so thank you to everyone who's still on. Is that right, Nardus?
Yes.
Yeah, so just to say really quickly, I don't think that anybody can concentrate if they're hungry. And there are some schools who literally will give rice krispies or something when a child has arrived in the morning because they just haven't eaten. So that applies generally. But, you know, in that specific case with this question, that's just something to bear in mind in the morning. If a child is particularly off, you know, just ask them, you know, are you hungry? And it's fantastic that, you know, schools are provided with fruit and, you know, raisins and things like that. So, yeah, just, you know, use any opportunity you can to if the school has something, that kind of facility where they can give breakfast. Obviously, don't encourage a child to milk it, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that point, like 100%. Definitely had children in my class. If my TA didn't notice that child was hungry, I wouldn't have noticed, and which is not good wasn't good practice from my side, because I should have been more aware of it. But we all know how difficult it is for class teachers sometimes, right? You know, you have to make sure that the learning is set up in the morning, and that's your priority. And the children comes in, and you've got your routines and things in place, and it's go from that offset moment. But yeah, I definitely have children that's been identified in my classroom who were definitely hungry in the morning. And when we identified it and we made sure that they could go to breakfast club and they were having their breakfast and then coming into the classroom, completely different child.
I think as society goes on, we have to be aware. I had one extreme case, and it wasn't my child. It was in another classroom, but this child was a refugee and suffered extreme PTSD. And when I was like, didn't know at the time, they were like, this child has seen war. And that's all you had to know, really. This child has seen war. And that sort of is what we now have to sort of also be aware. When you see refugee, there is sometimes the extreme. Hopefully we won't see as that sort of extreme. It's something I wish I hadn't, I hope not to see again, but there is something we have to be aware of on how extreme other people's circumstances are. And I couldn't even fathom it. And to be honest with you, I thought, where do we start? This is society's issue and the world issue. So yes, it was just a case of the calling in experts really as well, and letting people know we might have to think about that in the future, in the next term, that we are going to be dealing with children who we cannot even fathom what they have seen or what they have been through, and it might be a conversation to be had more broadly.
There's a quote. Sorry, you go.
Oh, so you just reminded me when you mentioned experts, Sharon. There is this theory about children being able to draw, sort of that kind of therapy. So none of us are therapists as far as I'm aware, but hand them lots of crayons and whatever. And art therapy helps. I remember one drama therapy. So if there's a drama therapist that comes into the school, maybe push for that.
Yes, absolutely. Drama therapy. Yeah, I have a lot of actor friends who have gone into that, and that's one of the children they work with, because it's so difficult to express what they have seen or been through.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. That's so helpful. I'm going to finish with a quote that I really like. And just coming back to what you just said, Sharon, it's like there's only limited things that we can do, right? But it's the awareness. It's also the awareness of what's happening, and we can't go naively and not recognize it. And I guess that's why these conversations are so important. And the quote is, "If we know better, we do better." And it's just the knowing, right? It's understanding and appreciating it, and really valuing each of those children and the circumstances that they're in, and trying to use better communication for us to make sure that that child is getting the best possible learning experience in the school. I'm going to leave it there. Sharon and Amifa, thank you so much for joining us today. Your experiences and your knowledge that you have is really helpful for everybody. And obviously everybody has their own experiences, but I really hope that what you've learned today is something that you all will be able to use in practice. I'm certainly taking a lot with me moving forward. Lovely. Thank you very much. And we'll end it there.
Bye.
Bye-bye.